The air hung heavy over Thornwood Plantation as July's merciless heat pressed down upon the Louisiana bayou. It was 1839, and the estate stood like a grotesque monument to Southern wealth. Wealth built on the broken backs of 300 souls who toiled from dawn until dusk in the surrounding cotton fields. The grand house, with its imposing white columns and sprawling verandas, cast long shadows across the manicured gardens where Charlotte Beaumont sat beneath a magnolia tree, her delicate hands trembling as she turned the pages of a leather-bound book she was never meant to find. Charlotte, at 19, was the picture of Southern gentility with her golden curls and sky-blue eyes. She had been raised by her uncle, Jeremiah Thornwood, since the fever had taken her parents when she was just 7. Her younger sister, Emmeline, 16 and equally fair, had shared in the same upbringing, privileged, sheltered, and meticulously educated in the ways of proper Southern ladies. But what Charlotte now held in her hands threatened to shatter everything she thought she knew about her family, her home, and the very foundation upon which her life was built. "Miss Charlotte, you shouldn't be out here in this heat. Master Jeremiah will be returning from New Orleans by sundown." The voice belonged to Abigail, an older house slave who had cared for Charlotte since her arrival at Thornwood. Her dark eyes briefly registered the ledger in Charlotte's hands before she looked away, her weathered face betraying nothing. "Abigail, do you know what this is?" Charlotte whispered, her voice barely audible above the buzzing of cicadas. "I found it hidden behind the books in Uncle's study. It's not just accounts." Abigail's eyes darted nervously toward the main house. "Miss Charlotte, some books ain't meant for reading. Some truths are better left buried." Charlotte flipped through the pages, her horror mounting with each entry. The ledger contained more than just the cold calculations of cotton yields and human property. Between the lines of figures were detailed notes, breeding records. Her uncle had been selectively breeding slaves for decades, noting physical attributes, intelligence, temperament, and the resulting offspring. But what made Charlotte's blood run cold were the entries from the last 5 years, with her own name and Emmeline's appearing repeatedly in Jeremiah's precise handwriting. Preparations continue for Charlotte's introduction to the program. Her education and refinement will fetch a premium when paired with Solomon's lineage. Estimated value of offspring, $2,500 to $2,000, depending on complexion and features. The words blurred as tears filled Charlotte's eyes. "What does this mean, Abigail? What program is he referring to?" Abigail remained silent, her gaze fixed on the ground. "Please," Charlotte begged, "I need to understand." "Some of the plantation owners," Abigail finally said, her voice a bare whisper, "they have special arrangements. Light-skinned slaves, especially women, fetch higher prices in certain markets. In New Orleans there are houses where such women are sold for specific purposes." The implication hung in the stifling air between them. Charlotte felt bile rising in her throat as she continued reading, discovering that her uncle's program involved using his own nieces to bear children with selected male slaves. These children would then be groomed and eventually sold to the notorious quadroon balls of New Orleans, where wealthy white men bid for light-skinned mistresses. The careful breeding ensured characteristics that were highly valued: European features, fair skin, and the refinement that came from being partially raised in a white household. "How long has this been happening?" Charlotte demanded, her voice rising despite Abigail's cautioning glance. "Your uncle's father started it. Many of the house slaves here at Thornwood. They're kin to your family, Miss Charlotte, some closer than others." The revelation struck Charlotte like a physical blow. She looked up at the grand house, seeing it now not as her beloved home, but as a place of calculated cruelty. Her eyes were drawn to her sister Emmeline, who was visible through the window of the sitting room, practicing piano as she did every afternoon, blissfully unaware of the fate being arranged for her. "What about my mother? Did she know? Was she part of this?" Abigail's silence was answer enough. A plan began to form in Charlotte's mind. "Abigail, I need your help." We have to get Emmeline away from here before Uncle returns. And she hesitated, the enormity of what she was contemplating momentarily overwhelming her. And we need to warn the others. Everyone mentioned in this ledger is in danger. Miss Charlotte, what you're talking about, it's not possible. Where would you go? How would you survive? The law is on your uncle's side. If you're caught helping slaves escape, it would be worse than death. Then we won't be caught, Charlotte replied, with a determination that surprised even herself. I've been reading about the people who help slaves reach the north. There's a network, a railroad of sorts, if we can make it to the next station. You're talking about the Underground Railroad, Abigail said, her voice dropping even lower. It's real, but it's dangerous, especially in Louisiana. We're too far south. Do you know anyone connected to it? Abigail hesitated, then gave a barely perceptible nod. There's a free man of color in the bayou. He helps people sometimes, but the journey is treacherous. The swamps, the slave catchers, the law. More treacherous than what awaits us here? Charlotte asked, gesturing to the ledger. That evening, as the sun set over Thornwood Plantation, Charlotte slipped into Emmeline's room, the hidden ledger clutched against her chest. Her sister looked up from her embroidery, her innocent face registering surprise at Charlotte's disheveled appearance. What's wrong? You look as though you've seen a ghost. Em, I need you to listen carefully, Charlotte said, sitting beside her sister on the bed. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I swear on Mother's grave that it's the truth. As Charlotte revealed the contents of the ledger, Emmeline's face passed through a range of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally a cold, quiet rage that Charlotte had never before seen in her gentle sister. "Show me," Emmeline demanded, reaching for the book with steady hands that belied the storm in her eyes. Charlotte watched as her sister read, page after page, entry after entry. When Emmeline finally looked up, her face was set with resolve. "When do we leave?" "Tonight," Charlotte answered. "Uncle is due back from New Orleans, but there's a storm brewing on the river. The captain will likely delay their departure until morning. This may be our only chance." As darkness fell, the sisters packed small bundles, only what they could carry without arousing suspicion. Abigail had arranged to meet them by the old cypress tree at the edge of the property, where she would guide them to the man who might help them escape. The sisters changed from their fine dresses into simpler attire, clothes that might allow them to pass as poor white travelers if they were fortunate. The plantation was quieter than usual that night, as if the very land was holding its breath. Charlotte and Emmeline slipped out through the kitchen door, the ledger hidden in Charlotte's bundle. They had just reached the shadow of the great oak that marked the beginning of the path to the cypress, when a voice stopped them cold. "And where might you young ladies be headed at this hour?" They turned to find Solomon, one of the field slaves mentioned repeatedly in Jeremiah's ledger, standing behind them. He was tall and powerfully built, his dark skin gleaming in the moonlight, his eyes wary but not hostile. "We're leaving," Charlotte said simply, deciding in that moment that the truth was their only option. "We found Uncle's ledger. We know what he's planning for us and for many others, including you." Solomon's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, knowledge perhaps, or resignation. "Miss Charlotte, Miss Emmeline, the swamps ain't kind to those who don't know them, and the world beyond ain't kind to runaways. But we're not asking you to come with us," Emmeline said, her voice stronger than Charlotte had expected. "But we're not staying here to be part of that, and we're taking this with us." She gestured to the bundle containing the ledger. "If anything happens to us, we've arranged for it to reach people who will make its contents known." Solomon studied them for a long moment. "I know about the ledger," he finally said. "I've known since I was a boy. My mother was part of the first generation of Master Thornwood's program. My father was his brother." The revelation hung in the humid night air. Charlotte felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted, leaving her unmoored in a world where nothing was as it seemed. "Then you understand why we have to leave," she said softly. Solomon nodded. "The path you're taking leads through Snake Creek. It's dangerous. There are quicksand bogs that can swallow a person whole. Let me guide you, at least as far as the free settlement. After that, you're on your own." Charlotte exchanged a glance with Emmeline. Could they trust him? But what choice did they have? The bayou was a labyrinth, and they were city-bred girls with no knowledge of its secrets. "Thank you," Charlotte finally said. "But you should know, we're not just running for ourselves. We want to expose what's happening here, to stop it." Solomon's laugh was bitter. "Miss Charlotte, what's happening at Thornwood is happening all across the South. It's not a secret. It's just not spoken of in polite company." But, he added, seeing the determination in their faces, "perhaps it's time someone did speak of it. Come, we need to move. The night won't last forever." As they followed Solomon into the darkness of the Louisiana bayou, Charlotte clutched the ledger tighter. It was no longer just a record of atrocities. It was evidence. And in the right hands, perhaps it could become something more, a weapon against the very system that had created it. Behind them, Thornwood Plantation receded into the night, its grand white columns ghostly in the moonlight. Before them lay uncertainty, danger, and a slim chance at justice. But for the first time in their lives, the Beaumont sisters were making their own choices, charting their own course, even if that course led straight into the heart of darkness. The bayou at night was a world transformed. What had seemed merely wild and untamed by day became otherworldly under the silver light of a waxing moon. Cypress trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their gnarled roots disappearing into black water. Spanish moss hung in ghostly veils, occasionally brushing against the faces of the three fugitives as they made their way along the narrow, twisting path. "Step where I step," Solomon warned, his voice barely above a whisper. "The solid ground here is deceptive." Charlotte and Emmeline followed close behind, their city-bred feet struggling to find purchase on the treacherous terrain. The night sounds of the swamp, bullfrogs croaking, insects buzzing, the occasional splash of something unseen entering the water, created a constant symphony that both concealed their movements and set Charlotte's nerves on edge. Every noise could be a pursuer. Every shadow might conceal a slave-catcher or one of her uncle's men. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when Solomon suddenly halted, raising his hand in a gesture for silence. The sisters froze, straining their ears against the ambient noises of the bayou. "Dogs," Solomon whispered after a moment, "far off but headed this way." Charlotte's heart hammered against her ribs. "Already? But Uncle isn't due back until morning." "Perhaps he returned early," Emmeline suggested, her voice small with fear. "Or someone discovered we were missing." Solomon's expression was grim in the dappled moonlight. "Likely one of the house slaves reported your absence to the overseer, hoping for favor. We need to move faster now, and we need to throw off the scent." He led them off the path and into the water itself, a black mirror that reflected the moon and stars above. The cold shocked Charlotte as it soaked through her simple cotton dress, reaching her waist before Solomon allowed them to stop. "The water will mask our scent, but we'll need to stay in it for a while. Can you both swim?" The Beaumont sisters exchanged a glance. Like most plantation daughters, they had been taught the rudiments of swimming during summers spent at their uncle's coastal property. But swimming in a peaceful cove under supervision was a far cry from navigating the treacherous waters of the bayou at night. "We can manage," Charlotte assured him, gripping Emmeline's hand tightly beneath the water's surface. For what seemed like hours, they waded through the swamp, sometimes in water so deep that Charlotte had to hold the precious ledger above her head with one hand while dog-paddling with the other. The distant baying of hounds occasionally reached them, sometimes seeming to draw nearer, other times fading into the cacophony of night sounds. "We're approaching the territory of Jean Lafitte," Solomon informed them, as they finally emerged onto a small island of relatively dry ground. "The smugglers' descendants still control these waters. They don't take kindly to plantation owners or their men trespassing here. Will they help us? Emmeline asked, wringing water from her sodden skirt. Perhaps. Or perhaps they'll sell you both back to your uncle for a good price. We don't want to test them if we don't have to. Solomon's eyes scanned the darkness ahead. There's a free settlement about 3 miles north of here. A woman there, Marie LeBlanc, is connected to the Underground Railroad. If we can reach her cabin by dawn, she might be able to hide you until arrangements can be made to move you further north. As they rested briefly on the island, Charlotte opened her bundle to check on the ledger. Despite her efforts to keep it dry, water had seeped into the leather binding. Some of the ink had run, blurring entries, but the damning evidence remained largely intact. She carefully rewrapped it, acutely aware that this record represented not just her and Emmeline's salvation, but potentially that of countless others. "Solomon," she said quietly, "you're mentioned extensively in this ledger. Uncle has plans for you too." Solomon's face remained impassive, but his eyes reflected a lifetime of contained rage. "I know what Master Jeremiah intended. I was to be paired with you, Miss Charlotte. Our children would have been 3/4 white, valuable commodities in the fancy trade." Charlotte felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she knew the words were wholly inadequate. "You have nothing to apologize for," Solomon replied. "You didn't create this system, but now you know its true nature. Few white folks ever do." They continued their journey as the night deepened. The bayou grew increasingly wild, the paths less defined. Twice, Solomon pulled them back just in time to avoid stepping into quicksand. Once, they froze in place as a massive alligator slid silently into the water mere yards from where they stood. The physical dangers of the swamp were ever present, but it was the human threat that continued to haunt them. The knowledge that somewhere behind them, men with dogs were hunting them like animals. "Tell me about this ledger," Solomon said, as they navigated a particularly treacherous stretch of marsh. "What exactly does it contain?" "Names, dates, physical descriptions," Charlotte replied, her voice tight with revulsion. "Records of pairings and the resulting children. Their prices when sold. It goes back 3 generations. My grandfather began it, apparently. And there are others like it," Solomon added grimly. "Every major plantation in Louisiana that deals in the fancy trade keeps similar records. It's a business, Miss Charlotte. A cold, calculated business of breeding human beings for specific markets." The reality of what Solomon was describing, the systematic nature of it, the generations of planning and record-keeping, made Charlotte feel physically ill. This wasn't the impulsive cruelty of an individual. It was an industry, a science of sorts, applied to human flesh and blood. "If we get this ledger to the north," Emmeline said suddenly, breaking her long silence, "to abolitionists who could publish its contents, wouldn't that help expose the truth? Force people to acknowledge what's really happening?" Solomon's laugh was without humor. "Miss Emmeline, the North already knows. Maybe not the particulars, but they know. They just choose not to see. The fancy trade provides mistresses for wealthy men in New York and Boston, just as it does in New Orleans. The only difference is the distance between the buyer and the plantation where the woman was bred." His words settled over them like a shroud as they pressed on through the night. Dawn was approaching. The eastern sky had begun to lighten almost imperceptibly. They needed to reach Marie LeBlanc's cabin before full daylight exposed them to any eyes watching the bayou. It was Emmeline who first noticed they were being followed. A slight movement in the water, too deliberate to be an animal, caught her attention. She tugged at Solomon's sleeve, pointing silently toward the disturbance. Solomon assessed the situation with a quick glance. "Slave catchers," he whispered. "2 of them using the water just as we did to mask their approach. They've gotten ahead of us somehow." "What do we do?" Charlotte asked, clutching the ledger tighter. "We change course. The settlement is still our best hope, but we'll need to circle around to approach it from the east." Solomon guided them off the narrow strip of land they'd been following and back into the water. this time moving at an angle away from their pursuers. The detour cost them precious time. The sky continued to lighten, and with each passing minute, their vulnerability increased. When they finally emerged from the swamp onto slightly higher ground, the first golden rays of sun were breaking through the cypress trees. There, Solomon pointed toward a small cabin barely visible through the trees. Smoke curled from its chimney, a sign that its occupant was already awake. "That's Marie's place." They had covered perhaps half the distance to the cabin when a voice rang out behind them. "That's far enough. Stop where you are." Charlotte turned to see two men emerging from the trees, rifles raised. She recognized one of them, Fletcher, her uncle's overseer, a man whose cruelty was legendary even by the standards of Louisiana plantations. The other was a professional slave catcher, judging by his weathered appearance and the distinctive leather vest with multiple pockets for manacles, coils of rope, and other tools of his trade. "Well, well," Fletcher drawled, a smile spreading across his face that didn't reach his cold eyes. "The young Mrs. Beaumont, out for a morning constitutional with one of Master Thornwood's prime bucks. I'm sure your uncle will be most interested to hear about this little adventure." "We know what he's planning," Charlotte said, stepping forward despite Solomon's warning hand on her arm. "We've seen his ledger. We know about the breeding program, about the children sold to the fancy trade. All of it." Fletcher's smile faltered only slightly. "I don't know what nonsense you're talking about, Miss Charlotte, but your uncle is beside himself with worry. Come along now, and we'll forget this foolishness." "The ledger doesn't lie," Emmeline chimed in, finding her voice. "3 generations of our family have been involved in this abomination. We won't be part of it, not anymore." The slave catcher spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Enough of this. Fletcher, secure the nigger. I'll take the girls." As the men stepped forward, a shot rang out, the sound echoing across the bayou. The slave catcher stumbled, a look of surprise crossing his face as he dropped to his knees, then fell forward onto the damp ground. Fletcher whirled, raising his rifle, but a second shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around before he too collapsed. From the direction of the cabin, a small figure approached, a smoking rifle in her hands. Marie LeBlanc was a tiny woman of mixed race, her skin the color of burnished copper, her hair gray and pulled back in a severe bun. Despite her size, she moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to defending her territory. "You 3 best come inside quickly," she called to them. "Those shots will bring others." Inside the one-room cabin, Marie efficiently tended to their immediate needs: dry clothes, warm food, and a place to rest. She examined the ledger with a grim expression, turning its pages with hands that bore the calluses of a lifetime of hard work. "This is valuable," she finally said, looking up at Charlotte, "not just for exposing the Thornwood operation, but as evidence of the systematic nature of the fancy trade. The abolitionists in Boston would pay handsomely to publish this." "We don't want money," Charlotte said firmly. "We want justice, and freedom for those still trapped at Thornwood." Marie's eyes, sharp and assessing, studied each of them in turn. "Justice is a luxury few can afford in Louisiana, child. But freedom, that might be possible for some. Your uncle will have every slave catcher in 3 parishes looking for you by nightfall. And he has friends in government, in law enforcement." "What about the Underground Railroad?" Emmeline asked. "Abigail said you could help us reach the north." Marie sighed, setting the ledger aside. "The railroad isn't like a real train, child. There ain't stations waiting every few miles, especially not this far south. From here to the first safe house in Mississippi is nearly 100 miles of hostile territory, and that's assuming you can cross the river without being caught." "But it's possible," Charlotte pressed. "Possible, yes. Likely, that's another matter." Marie rose and moved to the window, peering out cautiously. "Fletcher's not dead, just wounded. He'll make it back to Thornwood and report what happened here. My cabin won't be safe after today." "We've put you in danger," Solomon said, his voice heavy with regret. Marie waved away his concern. "I've been in danger since the day I was born with this skin in this place, but now we need to plan. You can't stay here and you can't go back." She returned to the table and spread out a crude map drawn on a piece of deerskin. "There's a man, a German immigrant who runs a small printing press in Baton Rouge. He's sympathetic to the cause. If you can reach him with that ledger, he might be able to help you get further north. But first, you'll need to evade the search parties that will be combing these swamps by nightfall." Charlotte studied the map, trying to memorize the route Marie was indicating. "What about Solomon? He can't come with us into Baton Rouge. It would be too dangerous." "There's a maroon community deeper in the bayou," Marie replied. "Escaped slaves who've established a settlement where the law doesn't reach. Solomon would be safe there, at least for a time." Solomon shook his head. "I'm not leaving the missus until I know they're safely on their way north. I gave my word." An unspoken communication passed between Solomon and Marie, something Charlotte couldn't fully decipher, but sensed was significant. "Very well," Marie finally said. "But you'll need a disguise. No one can know you're traveling with two white women." She moved to a trunk in the corner and withdrew a bundle of clothing. "You'll pose as their manservant, a free man of color employed to escort them to visit relatives in Baton Rouge. I have papers that might pass inspection if you're not scrutinized too closely." As they made preparations to leave, Charlotte found herself drawn to a small shelf of books in Marie's cabin, an unusual possession for anyone in the bayou, but especially for a woman of color. Among the volumes was a slim book with a worn leather cover, similar in appearance to her uncle's ledger. "What's this?" she asked, reaching for it. Marie's hand shot out, stopping her. "That's my own record," she said quietly. "Names, dates, descriptions, not of breeding stock, but of souls helped to freedom. Over 300 these past 15 years. Charlotte withdrew her hand, humbled. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. No need for apologies. But understand this. For every ledger like your uncle's, recording the buying and selling of human flesh, there are others like mine. Records of resistance, of courage, of humanity asserting itself against all odds." Marie's eyes held Charlotte's. "Which history prevails depends on who survives to tell it." As the morning wore on, Marie helped them prepare for the journey ahead. She provided them with food, water, and most crucially, information. Details about checkpoints to avoid, sympathetic households where they might find brief shelter, landmarks to guide them through the unfamiliar terrain between her cabin and Baton Rouge. "Remember," she warned as they prepared to leave, "the three of you present a strange picture. Two young white women of obvious breeding traveling with a black man will draw attention, papers or no papers. Keep your faces down, your voices low, and avoid main roads whenever possible. If questioned, Miss Charlotte is now Mrs. Charlotte Wilkins, a recent widow traveling to her family in Baton Rouge, accompanied by her sister. Solomon is George, a free man employed as your manservant." She handed Charlotte a simple gold band. "Wear this. A wedding ring offers some protection, some explanation for your travel. But be wary. It won't shield you from all suspicion." As they stepped out of the cabin into the humid Louisiana day, Charlotte felt the weight of the ledger in her bundle. It was their evidence, their weapon, perhaps their salvation. But it was also their greatest liability. If they were caught with it, there would be no plausible explanation, no possible innocent interpretation of their actions. "One last thing," Marie said, pressing something into Charlotte's hand. It was a small pistol, its grip worn smooth with use. "A woman alone needs protection in this world. Do you know how to use it?" Charlotte shook her head. "Point and pull the trigger," Marie said simply. "It's loaded with a single shot. Make it count." As they set off toward Baton Rouge, following a faint trail that skirted the edge of the bayou, Charlotte felt a strange sense of liberation mingled with terror. Behind them lay Thornwood Plantation, the only home she and Emmeline had known for more than a decade. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and a slim chance at justice. The ledger pressed against her side with each step, a physical reminder of the truth they carried, a truth that could set some free and condemn others to ruin. What they could not know, as they made their way cautiously through the Louisiana wilderness, was that Jeremiah Thornwood had returned from New Orleans earlier than expected, and that he now knew not only of their escape, but also of the ledger they had taken. And unlike Fletcher and the slave catcher, Jeremiah would not underestimate his nieces or the damage they could do with the evidence they carried. He had already dispatched riders to alert his contacts in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and every settlement in between. The net was closing around them, drawing tighter with each passing hour. And Jeremiah Thornwood, Lord of Louisiana, master of 300 souls, and architect of a breeding program that had produced some of the highest-priced fancy girls in the New Orleans market, was not a man accustomed to losing what he considered his property. The road to Baton Rouge stretched before them like a ribbon of dust and broken promises. They had left the relative safety of the bayou's edge for more traveled paths, a calculated risk that Marie had advised. "The swamp offers concealment," she had told them, "but it's slow going and time is not your ally. The main road is dangerous, but it will get you to Baton Rouge in 2 days rather than 5. The July sun beat down mercilessly as they walked, Charlotte and Emmeline now dressed in the plain, serviceable clothing of middle-class travelers rather than the fine dresses of plantation aristocracy. Solomon, too, had transformed, his field slave's rough garments replaced by the more respectable attire of a free man of color in service to a white family. The forged papers Marie had provided were tucked securely in his jacket, ready to be presented to any patrol that might stop them. They had been walking for hours when the sound of approaching hoofbeats caused them to stiffen. Solomon immediately adopted the deferential posture expected of a black man in the presence of whites, his eyes downcast, his shoulders slightly hunched to diminish his imposing height. Charlotte and Emmeline drew closer together, Charlotte's hand instinctively moving to the small pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. The rider who came into view was a young man, perhaps in his mid-20s, wearing the uniform of a parish constable. He reined in his horse as he approached them, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Good afternoon, ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "You're a fair piece from any town. May I ask where you're headed?" Charlotte stepped forward, consciously softening her aristocratic accent into something more befitting her current appearance. "Baton Rouge, sir. My sister and I are traveling to join our family there after my husband's passing." She twisted the gold band on her finger, a gesture of nervous widowhood that she hoped would appear genuine. The constable's eyes moved from Charlotte to Emmeline, then settled on Solomon with a harder gaze. "And this man? He belongs to you?" "George is a free man, sir," Charlotte replied, the words feeling strange on her tongue. "Employed in our service for the journey. He has his papers." The constable dismounted, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "I'd like to see those papers." Solomon produced the documents Marie had provided, his expression carefully neutral as the constable examined them. Charlotte held her breath, acutely aware of the ledger hidden in her bundle, of the pistol pressing against her thigh through the fabric of her dress. After what seemed an eternity, the constable handed the papers back to Solomon. "These seem in order," he said, though his tone suggested he remained unconvinced. "But you should know there's a reward being offered for 2 young women and a male slave who ran off from a plantation near New Orleans. The descriptions are somewhat similar to yourselves. Is that so?" Charlotte forced a small laugh. "Well, I assure you, sir, my sister and I are simply traveling to join our family after a period of mourning. We have nothing to do with any plantation near New Orleans." The constable studied her face. "The reward is substantial. $500 for information leading to their recovery." Charlotte maintained her composure, though her heart raced. "That is substantial indeed. I hope they're found safely. Traveling alone can be quite dangerous for young women." "Indeed it can," the constable agreed, his eyes lingering on Emmeline, who had remained silent throughout the exchange. Especially in these parts, there have been reports of runaway slaves forming bands in the swamps, attacking travelers. How frightening, Charlotte murmured. Perhaps you would be so kind as to escort us a little way, for protection. It was a calculated risk. Keeping the constable close would prevent him from riding ahead to alert others, and might lend credibility to their disguise. If he truly suspected them, he would already have acted. The constable considered her request, then nodded. I can accompany you as far as the crossroads, a few miles ahead. My jurisdiction ends there. As they continued down the road, the constable walking his horse alongside them, Charlotte maintained a stream of innocuous conversation, inventing details about her fictional late husband, their life together, and the family awaiting them in Baton Rouge. Emmeline occasionally added a comment, careful to match her sister's fabricated history. Solomon walked a few paces behind, the perfect image of a respectful servant. The constable, for his part, seemed to relax as they walked, perhaps reassured by their easy manner and consistent story. By the time they reached the crossroads he had mentioned, he appeared to have dismissed his initial suspicions. "This is where I leave you, ladies," he said, mounting his horse. "The road to Baton Rouge continues straight ahead. You should reach town by tomorrow evening if you keep a steady pace." "Thank you for your escort, sir," Charlotte replied with a polite smile. "It's comforting to know the law watches over travelers such as ourselves." As the constable rode away, heading down the eastern fork of the crossroads, they maintained their casual pace until he was out of sight. Only then did Charlotte release the breath she'd been holding, her shoulders sagging with relief. "He knew," Solomon said quietly, watching the dust cloud that marked the constable's departure. "He wasn't certain enough to act, but he suspected. Which means others will too," Emmeline added, her voice trembling slightly. "Uncle must have sent word ahead, just as Marie warned." Charlotte's hand moved to her bundle, feeling the outline of the ledger within. "Then we need to leave the main road. If that constable reports his suspicions to the next parish over, they'll be watching for us." Solomon nodded in agreement. "There's a smaller track about a mile ahead that branches west before turning north again. It's longer but less traveled. We might avoid patrols that way." The detour added hours to their journey. The smaller track was poorly maintained, overgrown in places, and wound through areas where the bayou encroached upon the land, forcing them to wade through shallow water at several points. By nightfall, they were exhausted, hungry, and still far from their destination. They made camp in a small clearing, a good distance from the track, concealed by a dense growth of cypress and Spanish moss. As Solomon gathered wood for a small, smokeless fire, Charlotte took stock of their provisions. Marie had provided them with enough food for 3 days: cornbread, dried meat, and a small sack of parched corn. They had already consumed nearly half of it. "We need to be careful with what remains," she told Emmeline as they spread their meager meal on a piece of cloth. "We don't know how long this journey might take or what delays we might encounter." Emmeline nodded, but her attention was elsewhere. "Charlotte," she said softly, "do you think we can actually succeed? The odds seem overwhelming." It was the first time since their escape that Emmeline had expressed doubt. Charlotte reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "We have to try, Em. We can't go back not knowing what we know, and we can't let this continue, not just at Thornwood but everywhere. This ledger," she patted her bundle, "it's evidence, real, undeniable evidence of what's happening behind the grand facades of plantations across the South, if we can get it to people who will use it." "But will they?" Emmeline persisted. "Solomon said the North already knows, they just choose not to see. What if no one cares about this evidence? What if all of this, running away, putting ourselves and others in danger, what if it's for nothing?" Charlotte had no easy answer. The question had haunted her own thoughts since they'd fled Thornwood. The system they were fighting against was vast, entrenched, profitable. A single ledger, no matter how damning its contents, might not be enough to even dent its foundations. "It won't be for nothing," Solomon said, returning with an armful of dry wood. "Even if the ledger doesn't change a single law or free a single slave, you two have already done something important. You've refused to participate. You've rejected the role you were assigned in this system. That matters." As night settled fully over the bayou, they took turns keeping watch. The sounds of the swamp, mysterious splashes, the call of night birds, the constant chorus of insects, created an eerie backdrop to their vigil. Each noise might be a natural part of the bayou's nighttime symphony, or it might be pursuers closing in. During her watch, Charlotte examined the ledger by the dim light of the dying fire. She had read it multiple times now, and each reading revealed new horrors. The clinical nature of the entries, the detailed physical descriptions of slaves, the careful tracking of lineages, the coldly calculated values assigned to human beings, spoke of a mind that viewed people as nothing more than livestock to be bred for profit. One entry in particular had caught her attention. April 15th, 1830. Female child born to Lucinda, age 22, quadroon, purchased from Willoughby Plantation, 1828, and Marcus, prime field hand, full-blooded African, acquired at New Orleans auction, 1827. Child displays excellent features, light complexion despite father's darkness. Named Sarah. Projected value at age 16, $1,800 to $2,000 if current attributes develop favorably. Lucinda to be bred again in 1832, but with lighter-skinned male to improve offspring's coloring. Charlotte had known Sarah, a house slave just a few years older than herself, who had been sold to a buyer from New Orleans shortly after Charlotte's arrival at Thornwood. She remembered Sarah's light golden skin, her delicate features, the graceful way she moved. At the time, Charlotte had been told that Sarah was going to work for a wealthy family in the city, a sign of favor and opportunity. Now she understood the truth. Sarah had been sold into the fancy trade, destined to become the mistress of some wealthy white man. Her entire life and appearance engineered for that purpose from before her birth. And the engineering continued generation after generation. Another entry dated just 2 years ago read, January 10th, 1837, second-generation program continuing with excellent results. Daughters of first-generation subjects showing superior refinement, education taking well. Charlotte, 19, ready for introduction to breeding program this year. Emmeline, 16, requires additional finishing before introduction in 1840. Prospects for third generation extremely promising. Estimated values of offspring from Charlotte and selected males range from $2,500 to $3,000, depending on phenotypical expression. The cold, calculating tone made Charlotte physically ill. She and Emmeline had been raised as Southern belles, educated in literature, music, and the social graces, not out of familial love or responsibility, but as an investment. Their refinement was just another attribute to be passed on to children who would be sold like prized horses. Her thoughts were interrupted by Solomon, who had taken the next watch. "You should rest," he said quietly, settling beside her. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Charlotte nodded, carefully rewrapping the ledger and placing it back in her bundle. "Solomon," she said hesitantly, "there's something I don't understand. The ledger mentions you specifically as intended for me, but you're a field slave, not a house servant. Your coloring is quite dark. It doesn't fit the pattern described in the other entries." Solomon's expression remained unreadable in the dim firelight. Master Jeremiah has been experimenting with different combinations. The fancy trade traditionally values lighter skin. Yes, but there's a market for every preference. Some buyers specifically seek darker-skinned women with European features. Others want the opposite. The goal is always the same: to produce children who combine characteristics from both races in ways that appeal to white buyers' tastes. The matter-of-fact way he described it only emphasized the horror of the system. "How can people do this?" Charlotte whispered. "How can they see other human beings this way?" "Money," Solomon replied simply. The fancy trade is the most profitable aspect of the slave business. A prime field hand might sell for $800, a skilled craftsman for $200, but a beautiful young woman, raised and trained to be a mistress to a wealthy white man, she might bring $3,000 or more at auction, and if she's educated, refined, able to converse on literature and play the piano, then the sky's the limit. Charlotte shuddered, remembering the music lessons, the elocution practice, the hours spent learning French and Italian. All of it had been preparation, not for the life of a Southern lady, but for the auction block. "Get some sleep," Solomon said gently. "I'll wake you if there's any trouble." Morning came with no sign of pursuit, but their relief was short-lived. As they prepared to continue their journey, the distant sound of dogs baying carried across the swamp. "Bloodhounds," Solomon confirmed, his expression grim. "They're tracking us through the bayou, not following the road." "How far?" Emmeline asked, hastily gathering her few belongings. "Hard to tell. Sound carries strangely in the swamp. Could be a mile, could be 3. But they're coming this way." They abandoned their plan to follow the smaller track and instead plunged directly into the bayou, moving as quickly as the treacherous terrain would allow. Solomon led the way, using his knowledge of swamp navigation to find passages through the seemingly impenetrable wilderness. The sounds of pursuit grew louder as the morning wore on. The baying of the hounds was now accompanied by the occasional shout of men, slave catchers closing in on their quarry. Charlotte's lungs burned with exertion, her dress torn and muddied, her feet blistered and bleeding inside her unsuitable shoes. Beside her, Emmeline struggled to keep pace, her face pale with exhaustion. "We can't outrun them," Solomon finally admitted, as they paused to catch their breath on a small knoll. "Not through this terrain. The dogs will find us eventually." "What do we do?" Emmeline asked, her voice small with fear. Solomon's eyes scanned their surroundings. "We need to split up. They're tracking my scent mainly. A black man's trail is what they expect to follow when hunting runaways. If we separate, you two might have a chance to reach Baton Rouge while they focus on me." "No," Charlotte said firmly. "We're not leaving you to face them alone. There must be another way." Solomon's expression softened momentarily. "Miss Charlotte, this was always how it was likely to end. I knew the risks when I agreed to help you. The important thing is the ledger, getting it to someone who can use it. That's what matters now." Before Charlotte could protest further, a new sound reached them, the rhythmic splash of oars cutting through water. From around a bend in the narrow bayou channel appeared a small flatboat, poled by a weathered old man with skin like tanned leather and eyes that had seen more than their share of the world's cruelty. "You folks look like you could use a ride," the old man called out, guiding his craft toward their position. "Name's Beauchamp. Marie sent me to find you." Relief flooded through Charlotte. "How did you know where to look?" "Marie's got eyes and ears all through these swamps," Beauchamp replied, bringing the boat alongside the knoll. "Word travels. Now get in quick. Those dogs ain't far behind." They clambered into the flat-bottomed boat, which rocked precariously under their weight. Beauchamp immediately pushed off, his pole finding purchase in the muddy bottom of the channel. "They'll follow the bank when they lose our trail," Solomon warned. "They'll know we took to the water." Beauchamp nodded. "That's why we ain't staying on the water long. There's an old trapper's cabin about a half-mile from here. We'll hole up there until dark, then continue on to Baton Rouge by a route they won't expect." As they moved silently through the water, the sounds of pursuit seemed to grow more distant. The slave catchers and their dogs had lost the trail, at least temporarily. But Charlotte knew it was only a matter of time before they found it again. The bayou might be vast, but it was also a limited space. Systematically, the searchers would check every island, every knoll, every potential hiding place. The trapper's cabin was little more than a shack, half-rotted and leaning at a precarious angle, but it offered concealment and a place to rest. Inside, Beauchamp produced a jug of water and some strips of dried venison, which they consumed gratefully. "Marie said you're carrying something important," the old man said, settling onto an upturned crate. something that could cause trouble for the plantation owners. Charlotte hesitated, then reached for her bundle. "A ledger?" she explained, unwrapping it carefully. "Records of a breeding program at Thornwood Plantation. My uncle's business." Beauchamp examined the book, turning its pages with gnarled fingers. Unlike Marie, who had reacted with controlled anger to the ledger's contents, the old man's face showed only tired resignation. "Seen similar before," he admitted. "Most of the big plantations keep records like this. It's how they track their investments." He looked up at Charlotte and Emmeline. "But it's rare for folks like yourselves to care. What made you different?" It was a question Charlotte had asked herself many times since discovering the ledger. What would she have done if she'd found it a year ago, 5 years ago? Would she have been shocked even then, or would she have accepted it as part of the world she inhabited? "We were raised to be part of it," she answered slowly, "but not to know we were part of it. When we discovered the truth, that we weren't just bystanders, but active participants in this system, that we were being used to perpetuate it, we couldn't stay." Beauchamp nodded, rewrapping the ledger carefully. "It's a powerful piece of evidence, but evidence only matters if someone's willing to act on it. The German printer in Baton Rouge, he's a good man, but he's just one man. The system you're fighting against has thousands backing it, and not just here in the South." "Then what's the point?" Emmeline asked, the question that had been haunting her now directed at Beauchamp. "If the system is too big to fight, why are you helping us? Why did Marie help us?" The old man's weathered face creased in a sad smile. "Because the alternative is to do nothing, and doing nothing is a choice too, a choice to let evil continue unchallenged." He turned to Solomon. "You understand, don't you, son? Why we fight even when we can't win?" Solomon nodded, his eyes meeting Beauchamp's in a moment of silent communion. "Because the fight itself has meaning. Because each person freed, each small victory matters. Because to not fight is to surrender your humanity." As the day wore on, they took turns watching from the cabin's single grimy window. The sounds of pursuit faded entirely by mid-afternoon, but none of them believed the search had been abandoned. More likely, the slave catchers had returned to their base to regroup, perhaps to bring in more men or fresh dogs. Beauchamp confirmed this theory as evening approached. "They'll be back at first light with reinforcements. We need to move tonight under cover of darkness. It's about 15 miles to Baton Rouge from here, following the bayou. If we pole steadily, we can make it before dawn." As they prepared to leave, Charlotte found herself drawn to a crude map scratched into the wall of the cabin, similar to the one Marie had shown them, but with additional markings, some in a code she couldn't decipher. "What is this?" she asked Beauchamp. "Routes," the old man replied. "Safe houses, danger points. It's how we move people north." He traced a line with his finger. "This here's the route we'll take tonight. Not the shortest way to Baton Rouge, but the safest." Studying the map, Charlotte was struck by the complexity of the network it represented. The Underground Railroad wasn't just a metaphor, it was an actual system with routes, stations, conductors like Marie and Beauchamp, a shadow infrastructure operating beneath the official one, dedicated to undermining the very foundation of Southern society. "There are more of you than I realized," she said softly. Beauchamp nodded. "More than most folks know. White, black, free, enslaved, all kinds of people helping in their own ways. Some can only offer a meal or a hiding place for a night. Others, like Marie, coordinate larger movements. Each person does what they can." As night fell fully over the bayou, they slipped out of the cabin and into Beauchamp's boat. The old man poled silently, navigating by starlight and an intimate knowledge of the waterways. Charlotte and Emmeline sat in the center of the craft, while Solomon took position at the bow, his keen eyes scanning for obstacles or signs of danger. The night sounds of the bayou enveloped them, the chorus of frogs, the occasional splash of fish or alligators, the whisper of wind through Spanish moss. Despite the danger of their situation, Charlotte found a strange peace in the rhythm of their progress, in the solidarity of their small group moving through the darkness toward an uncertain future. What awaited them in Baton Rouge, whether safety or capture, whether the German printer would help them or betray them, remained to be seen. But they had come this far, survived against the odds, and carried with them evidence that might in some small way challenge the brutal system that had shaped all their lives. As the boat glided silently through the black waters of the bayou, Charlotte clutched the ledger to her chest like a shield, or perhaps, she thought, more like a sword, a weapon to strike at the heart of an institution that had commodified human beings for generations. Whether that strike would land, whether it would have any effect at all, she couldn't know. But in the attempt itself, in the refusal to be complicit any longer, she had found a purpose that transcended the limited future that had been planned for her at Thornwood Plantation. Behind them, the pursuit gathered strength for the coming day. Ahead lay Baton Rouge and the possibility of exposing the truth. And all around them, invisible in the darkness but ever present, was the web of human connection that had brought them this far. People risking everything to challenge a system built on the denial of their very humanity. In that moment, despite the danger and uncertainty, Charlotte felt something she had never truly experienced before: freedom. Not just the physical freedom of escape, but the deeper freedom that comes from choosing one's own path, from acting according to one's own conscience, from refusing to accept injustice simply because it is traditional or profitable or convenient. It was a freedom that, once tasted, she knew she could never surrender, no matter what awaited them in Baton Rouge or beyond. The first light of dawn was breaking over the Mississippi River as Beauchamp guided the flatboat toward a dilapidated dock on the outskirts of Baton Rouge. The journey through the night had been uneventful, but tense, each unfamiliar sound causing them to freeze in anticipation of discovery. Now, as the city came into view, a new anxiety took hold. They were entering a place where the law, the church, and every institution of society was aligned against their purpose. "The printer's shop is near the center of town," Beauchamp explained in a low voice as they secured the boat. "Man named Heinrich Müller, German immigrant, came here 5 years ago. Keeps his head down, prints mostly business forms and notices, but he has connections to abolitionists in the north. If anyone in Baton Rouge can help you, it's him." "How do we reach him without being noticed?" Charlotte asked, acutely aware that their bedraggled appearance would attract attention in the city streets. Beauchamp pointed to a bundle in the boat. "Change of clothes for all of you. Nothing fancy but clean. And there's a back way into town, through the old French Quarter, narrow streets, few patrols. We'll go that way." As they changed, Charlotte and Emmeline taking turns behind a screen of cypress trees, while Solomon and Beauchamp kept watch, Charlotte tried to formulate a plan for their next steps. Getting the ledger to Müller was only the beginning. They would need to find safe passage further north, perhaps all the way to Boston or New York, where abolitionists might be able to use the evidence effectively. The clean clothes Beauchamp had provided were simple but respectable, the kind worn by working-class city dwellers rather than plantation aristocracy. For Solomon, there was a set of clothes appropriate for a free man of color in urban Louisiana, neither too fine to arouse suspicion nor too rough to suggest he was a runaway slave. "Keep your eyes down when we enter the city," Beauchamp instructed as they set off along a narrow, overgrown path. "Walk neither too quickly nor too slowly. If we're stopped, I'll do the talking. I'm known in these parts as a trapper and trader, sometimes hired to guide folks through the bayou. That's the story if anyone asks." The outskirts of Baton Rouge were stirring as they approached. Laborers heading to early shifts at the docks or warehouses, market vendors setting up their stalls for the day's business. Beauchamp led them through a maze of increasingly narrow streets, avoiding the main thoroughfares where patrols might be more frequent. Despite their caution, Charlotte could feel eyes upon them as they moved through the awakening city. A group led by an elderly white man, including 2 young white women and a black man, was unusual enough to attract notice. She kept her gaze fixed on the cobblestones beneath her feet, fighting the urge to look over her shoulder. Muller's print shop was located on a side street near the commercial district, a modest establishment with a weathered sign bearing the simple inscription, Muller's Printing and Stationery. A bell tinkled softly as Beauchamp pushed open the door, ushering them inside. The shop was empty, except for a thin, bespectacled man, arranging type at a workbench. He looked up at their entrance, his expression changing from professional welcome to cautious recognition as he saw Beauchamp. "Herr Beauchamp," he said, his German accent still pronounced despite his years in Louisiana. "An unexpected pleasure. What brings you to town?" Beauchamp closed the door behind them, turning the sign to closed before responding. "Friends in need of your special services, Heinrich. They bring important information from Thornwood Plantation." Muller's eyes moved from Beauchamp to the others, lingering on Charlotte and Emmeline with obvious surprise. "Thornwood? That's Jeremiah Thornwood's place, yes? One of the largest in St. James Parish. He's our uncle," Charlotte said, stepping forward and retrieving the ledger from her bundle. "And this is his record of the breeding program he and his father before him have been operating for 3 generations. Muller's eyebrows rose as he accepted the ledger, opening it with careful hands. As he read, his expression hardened, the muscles in his jaw working visibly. "This is incomprehensive," he finally said, looking up at Charlotte. "Names, dates, physical characteristics, prices, a complete record of human breeding for the fancy trade." "Can you help us get it to people who can use it?" Emmeline asked, speaking up for the first time since they'd entered the shop. "Abolitionists in the North who might publish it. Expose what's happening." Muller closed the ledger slowly, his fingers tracing the leather binding. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I have contacts in Boston, men and women who have been fighting for years to expose the true nature of slavery in the South. This ledger would be powerful evidence for their cause." He paused, studying each of their faces in turn. "But you understand the risk? If Thornwood discovers you've brought this to me, if the authorities learn of your presence here—" "We understand," Charlotte affirmed. "We can't go back, not after what we've learned, and we can't allow this to continue, not if we have the power to expose it." Muller nodded, his decision apparently made. "Very well. I can make copies of the most damning entries, send them north with my regular correspondence. It will attract less attention that way, but the original should go with you. It's too valuable to risk losing." "With us?" Solomon echoed. "You mean you can help us travel north as well?" "Not immediately," Muller cautioned. "There is a network, yes, but movements must be carefully coordinated, especially for a group as unusual as yourselves. 2 white women traveling with a black man will attract notice anywhere in the South." He turned to Beauchamp. "They will need a place to stay, somewhere safe while arrangements are made." Beauchamp scratched his stubbled chin. "Marie's is compromised. My cabin's too small and too exposed. What about the sisters?" Muller considered this, then nodded. "Yes, that might work. The Sisters of Mercy run a small hospital on the edge of town. They accept all patients, regardless of race or circumstance. Sister Agnes is sympathetic to the cause. She might shelter them for a short time." As they discussed logistics, Charlotte felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. They had been traveling for days, constantly alert, constantly afraid. The prospect of even temporary safety was almost overwhelming. Beside her, Emmeline swayed slightly on her feet, dark circles visible under her eyes. "They need rest first," Solomon observed, noticing the sisters' condition. "Food, water, a few hours of sleep, then we can move to the convent." Muller nodded in agreement. "There is a room in the back of the shop. Not comfortable, but private. You can rest there while I begin copying the ledger and send word to Sister Agnes." The back room was indeed humble, little more than a storeroom with stacks of paper, barrels of ink, and spare parts for the printing press. But Muller provided blankets, fresh water and bread, with a little cheese and dried fruit. For Charlotte and Emmeline, who had been subsisting on Beauchamp's dried venison and whatever edible plants Solomon could identify in the bayou, it seemed a feast. "Eat slowly," Solomon cautioned as Emmeline tore into a piece of bread. "Your stomachs have shrunk. Too much too quickly will make you sick." As they ate, Beauchamp and Muller conversed in low tones near the doorway. Charlotte caught fragments of their discussion, mentions of patrols in the city, rumors of increased scrutiny at river crossings, the names of contacts further north who might help with the next stages of their journey. "There is news you should know," Muller said, turning to address all three of them. "Word has reached Baton Rouge of your escape. Thornwood has offered a substantial reward, $1,000 for the return of his nieces, $500 for the slave who abducted them. The authorities have been alerted to watch for you." Charlotte felt a chill despite the stuffy warmth of the back room. "How much do they know? Do they know about the ledger?" The notices mention only that you were taken against your will by a rebellious slave," Muller replied. "There is no mention of any stolen property beyond yourselves. It seems Thornwood does not wish to advertise the existence of the ledger." "Of course not," Solomon said with bitter understanding. "Admitting such a document exists would raise questions about its contents. Questions he doesn't want answered publicly." "This works in our favor," Muller continued. "The search is for two kidnapped young women and their abductor, not for thieves carrying incriminating evidence. It allows me to position you differently to those who might help." "Position us how?" Emmeline asked. "As victims of conscience," Muller explained. "Young women raised in privilege, who upon learning the true nature of their family's business chose to flee rather than be complicit. It's a powerful narrative, one that might resonate with certain influential people in the North." Charlotte bristled slightly at being positioned as a narrative at all, but she understood the strategy. In the public imagination, they needed to be sympathetic figures, not criminals or traitors to their class. "Rest now," Muller advised, seeing Charlotte's fatigue. "I'll wake you when it's time to move to the convent. Beauchamp will return to the bayou. His continued presence here would draw unwanted attention." The old trapper nodded in agreement. "I've done what I can for you folks. From here on, you're in Muller's hands. He knows the city routes like I know the swamp." As Beauchamp prepared to leave, Charlotte felt compelled to express her gratitude. "We would never have made it this far without your help," she told him. "Thank you for risking so much for strangers." Beauchamp's weathered face creased in a brief smile. "Ain't strangers to the cause, miss. That's what matters." He tipped his hat to them all and slipped out through a back door, returning to the bayou world he knew so well. Despite her exhaustion, Charlotte found sleep elusive. The hard floor, the strange sounds of the city filtering through the walls of the print shop, and most of all, the knowledge that they were being hunted, all conspired to keep her on the edge of consciousness. Beside her, Emmeline had managed to drift off, her breathing deep and regular. Solomon sat with his back against the wall, his eyes closed, but his posture suggesting he remained alert. Charlotte's thoughts turned to Thornwood Plantation. She wondered if the slaves there knew of their escape, if the ledger's absence had been discovered, if her uncle's rage at their betrayal had been taken out on those who remained. The guilt of this possibility weighed on her. In exposing the truth, in seeking their own freedom, had they perhaps made life worse for those they'd left behind? Her troubled reverie was interrupted by the sound of the shop's front door opening, the bell tinkling merrily in contrast to the tension that immediately filled the air. Muller's voice, overly cheerful and slightly louder than normal, reached them through the closed storeroom door. "Sheriff Guidry, what an unexpected pleasure. What brings you to my humble establishment today?" Charlotte froze, exchanging a glance with Solomon, who had opened his eyes at the first sound of the bell. He pressed a finger to his lips, then moved silently to wake Emmeline, covering her mouth gently to prevent any sound of surprise. "Just making my rounds, Muller," a deep voice replied, "checking in with businesses, seeing if there's been any unusual activity." "Unusual activity?" Muller repeated, his tone convincingly puzzled. I'm afraid my days are quite predictable, Sheriff. Orders come in, print goes out. Not much excitement in the printing business. There's word of runaways in the area, the sheriff continued. 2 young women from a plantation near New Orleans, taken by a male slave, thought they might be headed this way. How terrible, Muller responded. Young ladies, you say? Kidnapped? I've heard nothing of this. When did it happen? Few days ago. The plantation owner, Thornwood's his name. He's offered a substantial reward. Got men searching all along the river and through the bayou. As the conversation continued in the front of the shop, Charlotte became aware of movement near the back wall of the storeroom. A section of the wooden paneling was sliding aside, revealing a narrow opening. A face appeared in the gap, a young black man, perhaps 16 or 17, his expression urgent as he beckoned to them. Solomon immediately understood, gesturing for Charlotte and Emmeline to gather their belongings. They moved as silently as possible toward the hidden entrance as the sheriff's voice grew louder, suggesting he was moving deeper into the shop. Mind if I have a look around, Muller? Just being thorough in my duties? Of course, Sheriff, though I'm not sure what you expect to find in a print shop. As you can see, it's just me here today. My assistant is out delivering orders. The 3 fugitives slipped through the opening in the wall, finding themselves in a narrow passage that appeared to run between the buildings. The young man who had revealed the secret entrance put his finger to his lips, then gestured for them to follow him. The passage was dark and smelled of damp stone and old timber. It twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow that they had to turn sideways to progress, other times opening into small chambers that might once have been storage rooms or cellars. Charlotte realized they were moving through the hidden infrastructure of Baton Rouge, the spaces between and beneath the official city, where those living in the shadows could move undetected. Their guide led them unerringly through the labyrinth until they emerged into what appeared to be the cellar of another building. Stone steps led upward to a wooden door, which the young man opened cautiously, revealing a kitchen garden bathed in mid-morning sunlight. Beyond the garden stood a modest building of whitewashed stone, the Convent of Mercy, according to the simple wooden sign beside its gate. A woman in the black habit of a Catholic nun was tending to the herb beds. She looked up at their appearance, showing no surprise. "You must be Thornwood's nieces," she said, her Irish accent still strong despite what must have been many years in Louisiana. "I'm Sister Agnes. Heinrich sent word you might be coming. Quickly now, inside before you're seen." The interior of the convent was cool and dim after the brightness of the garden. Sister Agnes led them through a plain corridor to a small room at the back of the building. It contained 2 narrow beds, a washstand and little else, but to Charlotte it seemed as luxurious as Thornwood's finest guest chamber. "You'll be safe here for a time," Sister Agnes assured them. "Few question the comings and goings at a hospital, especially one that serves the poor and outcast. Your presence won't seem unusual." "What about Solomon?" Charlotte asked, noticing the nun's gaze lingering on their companion. "He can't stay with us." "It would raise too many questions," Sister Agnes replied, "but we have quarters for male patients in another wing. He'll be comfortable there, and not far from you." Solomon nodded his understanding. "It's safer this way." A black man staying too close to white women would attract attention, even in a convent hospital. As they settled into their temporary sanctuary, Charlotte felt the full weight of their journey descend upon her. The ledger was safe for now, in Muller's hands, being copied for transmission to northern abolitionists. They had found allies willing to risk everything to help them. But they were still deep in Louisiana, still in danger, still a long way from true freedom or justice. The days at the convent passed in a strange limbo of safety and tension. Sister Agnes had presented Charlotte and Emmeline to the other nuns as distant relatives fallen on hard times, temporarily seeking shelter while arrangements were made for their future. Solomon was simply another patient, recovering from injuries sustained in a logging accident. The other sisters accepted these stories without question, either out of genuine belief or tacit understanding of the convent's role in the Underground Railroad. On the third day, Muller arrived under the guise of delivering printed materials to the convent. In the privacy of Sister Agnes's small office, he shared his progress and plans. "I've completed copies of the most significant entries," he reported, producing several folded papers from inside his coat. "These are being sent north through trusted channels. The original ledger remains secure at my shop." "What about our passage?" Emmeline asked. The days of relative safety had restored some of her spirit and determination. "How soon can we leave Baton Rouge?" Muller's expression grew more serious. "That is more complicated. The river is being watched closely. Thornwood's men have spread out along the Mississippi, checking boats headed north. And you," he nodded toward Solomon, "would be particularly vulnerable on a steamboat or barge." "What about by land?" Charlotte suggested. "Possible, but slow and dangerous. You would need to cross through Mississippi and Tennessee, slave states both, with patrols and slave catchers everywhere." "Then what do you suggest?" Solomon asked, his voice level but tinged with frustration. Muller leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the privacy of the office. "There is a merchant ship due in port tomorrow, bound for Philadelphia. The captain is a Quaker, known to sympathize with the abolitionist cause. For a substantial payment, he might be willing to take on passengers." "We have no money," Charlotte pointed out. "Everything we had was left at Thornwood." "The network can provide some funds," Sister Agnes interjected. "And the cause itself may cover the rest, considering the value of what you bring." Muller nodded in agreement. "The ledger is evidence worth far more than the passage fee to those fighting against slavery. I've already communicated its existence to key contacts in Boston. They are eager to receive both it and you." "All three of us?" Solomon asked, the question that had been hanging unspoken in the air. "The captain will take a black man as a passenger?" Muller hesitated. "That is another complication. The captain is willing to take the young ladies as cabin passengers. For you, the arrangement would be different." "Different how?" Charlotte demanded, already suspecting the answer. "He would travel in the hold," Sister Agnes said quietly, "hidden among the cargo. It's how most escapees travel north by sea." Charlotte's indignation flared. "After everything he's risked for us? After saving our lives multiple times? He's treated like cargo while we enjoy cabin privileges?" "It's the reality of our world, Miss Charlotte," Solomon said with resignation. "Even those who oppose slavery often carry the prejudices of their upbringing. I would rather travel in a ship's hold toward freedom than in comfort toward continued bondage." The practicality of his response did nothing to soothe Charlotte's sense of injustice, but she recognized the truth in it. Their options were limited, their situation precarious. They could not afford to reject help because it came with conditions that highlighted the very inequalities they were fighting against. "When would we leave?" she asked, tacitly accepting the plan. "Tomorrow night," Muller replied. "The ship, the Northern Star, docks in the afternoon. Once cargo operations are complete after midnight, you would board separately. The sisters would go first, as legitimate passengers with tickets purchased by a benevolent uncle in Philadelphia. Solomon would be brought aboard later, concealed in a shipment of cotton bales being loaded for the return journey." Charlotte looked to Emmeline, then to Solomon, gauging their reactions. Her sister's face showed the strain of their ordeal, but also a quiet determination. Solomon remained stoic, his expression revealing little of his thoughts. "It seems our best option," Charlotte finally said. "But what about the ledger? Should it travel with us, or separately?" "With you," Muller said firmly, "divided from its context. From your testimony about how and where you found it, the ledger loses much of its power. The abolitionists in Philadelphia will want to hear your story directly, to understand the full scope of what this document represents." As Muller departed, promising to return the following evening with final arrangements, Charlotte felt a curious mixture of hope and dread. They were so close to escape, yet still surrounded by danger on all sides. One misstep, one betrayal, and everything they had risked would be for nothing. That night, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Charlotte slipped out of the small room she shared with Emmeline and made her way to the convent's modest chapel. The space was empty, lit only by a few candles burning on the altar. She was not particularly religious. The Christianity practiced at Thornwood had always seemed more concerned with justifying the existing order than challenging it. But she found herself drawn to the quiet sanctuary. Couldn't sleep either. Solomon's voice came softly from a shadowed corner. Charlotte started slightly, then relaxed as he moved into the dim light. "Too much to think about," she admitted. "Too many ways tomorrow could go wrong." Solomon nodded, taking a seat in a pew across the narrow aisle from her. For a time they sat in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. "If we make it to Philadelphia," Charlotte eventually said, "what will you do? Where will you go?" Solomon considered the question. "North, perhaps. To Boston or New York. There are communities of free blacks in both cities, or to Canada, where American law can't reach me." He paused. "And you? What future do you see for yourself?" It was a question Charlotte had avoided examining too closely. Their escape had been driven by the need to get away, to expose the truth, not by any clear vision of what might come after. "I don't know," she admitted. "Emmeline and I have never lived independently. We've never had to work to support ourselves. Our education was designed to make us ornamental, not useful." "You underestimate yourselves," Solomon said. "You've shown courage and resourcefulness these past days that many would envy. And you have something valuable, your story, your witness to the truth of what happens on plantations like Thornwood. The abolitionists will value that." Charlotte contemplated his words. Perhaps there was a future for them in the North, speaking about what they had seen and experienced, using their privileged perspective to reach audiences who might dismiss the same testimony coming from escaped slaves. "I keep thinking about those still at Thornwood," she confessed. "Abigail, who helped us escape, the others mentioned in the ledger. By leaving, by taking this evidence, have we made their lives worse?" Solomon's expression grew somber. "It's possible. Your uncle is not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. There will be punishments, investigations." He met her troubled gaze directly. "But sometimes a few must suffer for the possibility of freedom for many. If this ledger helps expose the breeding programs, if it changes even a few minds about the true nature of slavery, then perhaps the cost will prove worthwhile in time." It was cold comfort, but Charlotte recognized the hard truth in his words. The system they were fighting against was vast and deeply entrenched. Change would not come without pain, without sacrifice. "We should try to rest," Solomon said after another period of silence. "Tomorrow we'll test all our strength." As they rose to return to their separate quarters, Charlotte impulsively reached out, taking Solomon's hand in hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that meeting you, knowing you, has changed me in ways I'm still discovering. You've shown me a courage and dignity that I can only hope to emulate." Solomon's hand tightened briefly around hers, a gesture of acknowledgement more powerful than words. Then he was gone, a shadow moving through shadows, back to the men's wing of the convent hospital. The following day passed with excruciating slowness. Charlotte and Emmeline remained in their room, out of sight of any visitors to the convent. Sister Agnes brought them simple meals and updates on the preparations for their departure. The Northern Star had docked as expected. Müller had secured their passage and would arrive after dark to escort them to the ship. As twilight deepened into night, Charlotte felt her nerves stretching to the breaking point. She checked and rechecked their few possessions, ensuring the ledger was securely wrapped and hidden in her bundle. Beside her, Emmeline sat very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on some invisible point. "Are you afraid?" Charlotte asked softly. Emmeline turned to her with a small, tremulous smile. "Terrified. But also, I don't know if this makes sense, but I feel more alive than I ever did at Thornwood. There, everything was decided for us. Our days were planned, our futures mapped out. Here, each moment feels consequential, each choice matters. Charlotte nodded, understanding exactly what her sister meant. Despite the danger, despite the hardship, there was a fierce joy in choosing their own path, in fighting for what they believed to be right. A soft knock at their door announced Sister Agnes. "It's time," she said simply. "Muller is waiting in the garden." They followed the nun through the quiet corridors of the convent, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat. Solomon joined them at a side entrance, accompanied by a younger nun who had been caring for patients in the men's wing. "The ledger?" he asked quietly. Charlotte patted her bundle in confirmation. "Safe. And you? Are you ready?" Solomon's answering smile held no humor. "As ready as a man can be to be smuggled aboard a ship like contraband." Muller was waiting as promised, his expression tense as he ushered them toward the hidden passage that had brought them to the convent days earlier. "We must move quickly," he explained as they descended into the underground network. "There are extra patrols in the city tonight. Someone may have reported suspicious activity around the convent." The return journey through the hidden passages of Baton Rouge seemed more hurried, more dangerous than their arrival. Twice they froze at the sound of footsteps overhead, or voices carrying through the thin walls that separated them from the public streets. Muller led them not back to the print shop, but toward the river, emerging finally in what appeared to be a warehouse near the docks. "The Northern Star is moored just beyond," he whispered, pointing through a grimy window toward the silhouette of a merchant vessel visible in the moonlight. "Charlotte and Emmeline, you'll board first as legitimate passengers. Captain Reynolds is expecting you. Solomon, you'll need to wait here until the cargo loading begins. I'll return for you then." "We should stay together," Charlotte protested. Muller shook his head firmly. "Impossible. 3 people together attract notice. 2 young women boarding as passengers is one thing. Adding a black man to your party would raise immediate suspicion." Reluctantly, Charlotte acknowledged the logic of the plan. She turned to Solomon, suddenly finding it difficult to say goodbye, even for what was supposed to be a temporary separation. "We'll see you on board," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Stay safe." Solomon nodded, his face half in shadow. "Keep the ledger close. Trust no one but the captain, not even the crew. Ships' crews are mixed lots. Some may sympathize with the South." With a final glance back, Charlotte followed Muller and Emmeline out of the warehouse and onto the docks. The night air was thick with the smells of the river, mud, fish, smoke from the steamboats that plied the Mississippi day and night. Workers moved about, loading and unloading cargo under the harsh light of oil lamps. Muller guided them confidently through the activity, projecting the air of a businessman escorting clients. The gangway to the Northern Star was guarded by a weathered sailor who eyed them with open curiosity. "Business aboard at this hour?" he questioned as they approached. "Passengers for Captain Reynolds," Muller replied smoothly, producing papers from his coat. "The Mrs. Wilkins, bound for Philadelphia. Their uncle arranged passage directly with the captain." The sailor examined the papers, then gave Charlotte and Emmeline a more thorough assessment. Whatever he saw apparently satisfied him, for he stepped aside with a nod. "Cabin 3, portside. Captain's at supper, but said to expect you." Aboard the ship, the smells of tar and hemp rope mingled with the more immediate odors of cooking and unwashed bodies. A cabin boy was summoned to guide them to their quarters. A tiny compartment with 2 narrow berths, a small porthole, and barely room to turn around. After the days of travel through the bayou and hiding in the convent, however, it seemed luxurious to Charlotte. "The captain will visit you once we cast off," the boy informed them. "Best stay in your cabin until then. Some of the crew don't take kindly to having women aboard. Say it's bad luck." After he departed, Charlotte and Emmeline exchanged a nervous glance. They were now committed to this course, aboard a ship with an unknown captain and a potentially hostile crew, separated from Solomon, carrying evidence that would condemn one of Louisiana's most powerful plantation owners. "We've come too far to turn back now," Emmeline said, reading Charlotte's expression. "Whatever happens, we face it together." Charlotte nodded, drawing strength from her sister's resolve. She placed her bundle on one of the berths and carefully unwrapped the ledger, checking yet again that it had survived their journey intact. The leather-bound book, with its meticulous records of human breeding and suffering, represented both their greatest vulnerability and their greatest hope for justice. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Through the porthole, Charlotte could see activity on the docks continuing under the harsh glare of lanterns. Cargo was still being loaded onto the Northern Star, crates and barrels and bales of cotton. Somewhere in that process, Solomon would be smuggled aboard. She strained her eyes, trying to spot him among the workers, but could discern nothing helpful in the confusion of movement below. Near midnight, the rhythm of the ship changed. Orders were shouted, ropes cast off, the gangway withdrawn. Charlotte felt a subtle movement beneath her feet as the Northern Star was freed from its moorings and began to drift away from the dock. "We're moving!" Emmeline whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and excitement. "We're actually leaving Louisiana." A sharp knock at their cabin door interrupted the moment. Charlotte hastily rewrapped the ledger and concealed it beneath her berth before opening the door. Captain Reynolds was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face weathered by decades at sea and eyes the pale blue of a winter sky. He studied the sisters with frank assessment before stepping into the small cabin and closing the door behind him. "Miller vouches for you," he said without preamble, his accent marking him as a New Englander. "Says you're carrying evidence that could help the abolitionist cause. That true?" Charlotte nodded, retrieving the ledger from its hiding place. "My uncle's breeding records," she explained, opening the book to reveal the damning entries. 3 generations of selecting and pairing slaves to produce children for the fancy trade." Reynolds examined a few pages, his expression darkening. "Been at sea 40 years, he said finally, closing the ledger with a snap. "Seen a lot of ugly things. This ranks among the worst." He handed the book back to Charlotte. "Keep it close. There are men aboard who wouldn't hesitate to throw it, and you, overboard if they knew what you carried." "What about our companion?" Emmeline asked. "Solomon? Was he brought aboard safely?" The captain's face revealed nothing. "Your man's aboard. Hidden where my first mate suggested. Conditions aren't comfortable, but he'll survive the journey." He moved toward the door. "We'll reach Philadelphia in about 3 weeks, weather permitting. Stay in your cabin as much as possible. I'll have meals sent to you. The fewer crew members who take notice of you, the better." After Reynolds departed, Charlotte secured the ledger once more, this time hiding it between the thin mattress and the wooden frame of her berth. 3 weeks, she murmured, trying to imagine the days ahead confined to this tiny space. And then Philadelphia. "And freedom," Emmeline added softly. "For us, and perhaps eventually for others, if the ledger does what we hope." As the Northern Star made its way down the Mississippi toward the Gulf of Mexico, Charlotte found herself thinking of Thornwood Plantation, now miles behind them and receding with each turn of the ship's propeller. The grand house with its white columns, the gardens where she had spent countless hours reading or embroidering, the fields where hundreds labored in conditions she had never truly allowed herself to see clearly. She thought of her uncle, imagining his rage when he learned of their escape, of the stolen ledger, of their intention to expose the careful system he had inherited and expanded. Jeremiah Thornwood was not a man who accepted defeat. He would pursue them, use every resource at his disposal to silence them before they could share what they knew. But for now, at least, they were beyond his immediate reach. The Northern Star was carrying them away from Louisiana, away from the only life they had known, toward an uncertain future in the North. The Ledger was safe, Solomon was aboard, and they had allies in the abolitionist movement waiting to receive them in Philadelphia. It was not victory, not yet, but it was a beginning, a first step toward exposing the truth that lay behind the genteel facade of Southern plantation life, and in that exposure, perhaps, lay the seeds of change. The journey north proved more arduous than Charlotte had anticipated. Though their cabin was private, it was also stifling in the summer heat. The ship rolled constantly on the open waters of the Gulf, causing seasickness that left both sisters weak and miserable for days. The crew, as Captain Reynolds had warned, regarded them with suspicion and occasionally open hostility, mutterings about women bringing bad luck following them when they ventured briefly on deck for air. Of Solomon, they saw nothing. Captain Reynolds visited their cabin every few days, bringing news that their companion was safe, but offering no opportunity for them to see him. The separation weighed heavily on Charlotte, who had come to rely on Solomon's quiet strength and wisdom during their escape from Thornwood. "He's in the forward hold," the captain informed them a week into the journey, "concealed among the cotton bales. It's hot, airless work down there, but he's being provided with water and food by my first mate, the only other crew member who knows of his presence." "Can we see him?" Charlotte asked. "Not for the first time." Reynolds shook his head firmly. "Too risky. The crew already wonders why two young women are traveling unaccompanied. If they discovered a black man hidden aboard, especially one connected to you, the questions would be impossible to answer satisfactorily." The days blended into one another as the Northern Star made its way up the Atlantic coast. Charlotte used the time to organize her thoughts, to prepare for what would come in Philadelphia. The Ledger had become like an extension of herself, something she checked compulsively throughout the day, always ensuring it remained secure and undamaged. Sometimes in the quiet hours of night when Emmeline slept fitfully in the berth across from hers, Charlotte would open the Ledger and read through its entries by the dim light of the cabin's single oil lamp. The cold, calculating notations never failed to chill her, especially now that she could put faces to many of the names recorded in her uncle's precise handwriting. July 15th, 1834. Female child born to Elizabeth. Quadroon, purchased 1830, and James, house servant Mulatto, born on plantation 1812. Child exceptionally fair, good features, named Lily, to be raised in house environment with emphasis on refinement and music. Projected value at maturity, $2,200 to $2,500. Charlotte remembered Lily, a beautiful girl a few years younger than herself, who had served as a lady's maid to visiting guests. She had possessed a natural talent for the piano, which Jeremiah had encouraged, allowing her lessons with the same tutor who taught Charlotte and Emmeline. Now Charlotte understood why. Lily's musical abilities would increase her value in the fancy trade, make her more appealing to the wealthy men who frequented the notorious quadroon balls of New Orleans. The knowledge that she and Emmeline had been raised alongside girls like Lily, educated, refined, prepared for society, but with vastly different destinies planned for them, filled Charlotte with a complex mixture of guilt, rage, and determination. The system that had created these parallel paths, that had designated some human beings as property to be bred and sold, while others enjoyed lives of privilege based solely on the accident of their birth, had to be exposed, had to be challenged. As the Northern Star approached Philadelphia, tension aboard the ship increased. Captain Reynolds visited their cabin more frequently, updating them on their progress and preparing them for arrival. "We'll dock tomorrow morning," he informed them on their 20th day at sea. "There will be abolitionists waiting to receive you, friends of Muller's who have been alerted to your coming. They'll take you to a safe house where you can rest before deciding your next steps." And Solomon?" Emmeline asked. "How will he disembark without being noticed?" "After dark, once the cargo operations are complete and most of the crew has gone ashore, my first mate will guide him to the same safe house where you'll be staying." Reynolds hesitated, then added, "You should know that your story has preceded you. Word has spread through abolitionist circles of the Thornwood Ledger. There will be many eager to see it, to hear your testimony." The news was both encouraging and intimidating. Charlotte had focused so intently on escaping, on reaching the north with the ledger intact, that she had given little thought to what would come after. Now she faced the prospect of becoming a public figure in the abolitionist movement, of having her family's darkest secrets exposed to scrutiny and condemnation. "Are we doing the right thing?" she asked Emmeline after Reynolds had departed. "Exposing the ledger, making it public? It will destroy Uncle Jeremiah, disgrace our family name." Emmeline's expression was unexpectedly fierce. "Our family name deserves disgrace. 3 generations of Thornwoods have built their fortune and reputation on the systematic breeding and selling of human beings. They've treated people like livestock, calculating their worth based on skin tone and facial features. If exposing that truth brings our family name crashing down, then so be it." Charlotte nodded, drawing strength from her sister's conviction. The Emmeline who had left Thornwood 3 weeks ago, sheltered, timid, uncertain, had been transformed by their journey. In her place stood a young woman with a clear moral compass and the courage to follow it. Philadelphia appeared on the horizon the following morning. A sprawl of buildings, church spires, and ship masts gradually taking shape as the Northern Star approached the busy harbour. Charlotte and Emmeline stood at the rail for the first time in days, watching as the city grew larger, more defined, more real. "We made it," Emmeline whispered, clutching her sister's hand. "We actually made it." Charlotte nodded, though she knew their journey was far from over. They had escaped Thornwood, had crossed a physical distance of hundreds of miles. But the greater distance, the moral and social chasm between the world they had left behind and the one they were entering, was yet to be navigated. As the ship docked and preparations for disembarkation began, Captain Reynolds came to escort them personally. "My first mate has arranged a carriage," he explained. "It will take you directly to the safe house. Remember, speak to no one on the docks. Keep your faces down and your voices silent until you're safely away." The bustle of the Philadelphia harbor was overwhelming after the confined quiet of their cabin. Sailors shouted to one another in a dozen languages. Cargo swung precariously overhead as it was unloaded by creaking winches. Horses and wagons created a constant backdrop of noise and motion. Through it all, Reynolds guided them steadily toward a waiting carriage, its driver a somber-faced black man who nodded in silent acknowledgement as they approached. "This is William," Reynolds said quietly. "He'll take you to those expecting you. Trust him." To the driver, he added, "The package we discussed will follow after dark." William helped the sisters into the carriage, then climbed to his seat and set the horses in motion without a word. As they pulled away from the docks, Charlotte caught a final glimpse of the Northern Star, the vessel that had carried them to freedom. Somewhere in its hold, Solomon waited for nightfall and his own chance at a new beginning. The safe house was located in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Philadelphia, a modest brick home indistinguishable from its neighbors, except for the unusual number of people coming and going throughout the day. William delivered them to the rear entrance, where they were met by a middle-aged Quaker woman who introduced herself simply as Ruth. "We've been expecting you," she said, ushering them into a small but comfortable sitting room. "News of your escape and what you carry has reached many ears. There are those who are very eager to meet with you." "Solomon?" Charlotte asked immediately. "The man traveling with us? He's still on the ship but should be brought here after dark." Ruth nodded. "Arrangements have been made. William will return to the docks to guide him here safely." She studied the sisters with kind but assessing eyes. "You both look exhausted. There will be time for questions and discussions tomorrow. For now, rest is what you need most." The room provided for Charlotte and Emmeline was simple but clean, with 2 beds, a washstand, and windows that opened onto a small garden. After the cramped confines of the ship's cabin, it seemed luxuriously spacious. Fresh clothing had been laid out for them. Plain, practical dresses in the Quaker style, far removed from the fine gowns they had worn at Thornwood, but infinitely preferable to their travel-stained garments. As evening approached, Charlotte found herself growing increasingly anxious about Solomon. The ledger was safely hidden beneath a floorboard in their room, but until Solomon joined them, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey remained incomplete. "He'll be here soon," Emmeline reassured her, noticing her sister's restlessness as they sat down to a simple dinner with Ruth and 2 other residents of the safe house, a young Quaker man named Elijah, who served as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and an older black woman introduced as Mrs. Johnson, herself a former slave who now helped others escape. "The ship's unloading will be finished by now," Elijah added. "William knows his business. He'll bring your friend safely to us." It was well past midnight when a soft knock at the back door announced William's return. Charlotte, who had been unable to sleep, rushed downstairs to find Solomon standing in the kitchen, his tall frame stooped with exhaustion, but his eyes alert as ever. "You made it," she breathed, fighting an unexpected urge to embrace him. "We were so worried." Solomon managed a tired smile. The journey was challenging, but worth every moment to be standing here now, on free soil. He glanced around the kitchen. "The ledger, it's safe. Hidden upstairs," Charlotte assured him. "No one has seen it yet except Captain Reynolds. Ruth says there are abolitionists eager to meet with us tomorrow to hear our story and examine the evidence." Ruth, who had come downstairs upon hearing voices, nodded in confirmation. "The Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society has called a special meeting. Several prominent members will be here at noon tomorrow. They're particularly interested in the documentation you've brought. Evidence of the breeding programs has been largely anecdotal until now." The following day brought a flurry of activity to the safe house. By mid-morning, visitors began to arrive. Serious-faced men and women, mostly Quakers, who greeted the sisters and Solomon with a mixture of respect and barely concealed excitement. Among them was William Lloyd Garrison, editor of The Liberator, one of the most influential abolitionist publications in the country. "What you have brought us," he told Charlotte after examining the ledger, "is a weapon more powerful than any rifle or cannon. This is evidence that cannot be dismissed as mere sentiment or exaggeration. This is the cold, calculating reality of the slave system, documented by the slave owners themselves." As Charlotte related their story, finding the ledger, discovering its contents, the flight through the bayou, the help they had received along the way, she was struck by the rapt attention of her audience. These people, many of whom had dedicated their lives to the abolitionist cause, were hearing confirmation of what they had long suspected, but rarely been able to prove. "We intend to publish excerpts from the ledger in The Liberator," Garrison explained when she had finished. "With your permission, of course. Your names would be withheld for your protection, but your testimony, the fact that you are Thornwood's own nieces, adds tremendous weight to the evidence." "And what of Solomon?" Charlotte asked, glancing at her companion who had remained largely silent during the meeting. "His risk was as great as ours, his courage even greater." Garrison turned to Solomon with evident respect. "Your testimony is equally valuable, sir. The perspective of someone who was himself part of this breeding program, who witnessed its operation from within, would be compelling to many readers who might otherwise remain skeptical." Solomon considered this, his expression thoughtful. "If my words can help expose the truth, then I will speak. But understand, this ledger, this program at Thornwood, it is not unique. Similar records exist on plantations across the South. The breeding of slaves for specific markets is a cornerstone of the system, not an aberration." The meeting continued for hours, plans being formulated for how best to use the evidence they had brought north. The ledger would be copied, its contents analyzed and published. Charlotte, Emmeline, and Solomon would be invited to speak at abolitionist gatherings, their first-hand accounts adding human dimension to the cold facts recorded in Jeremiah Thornwood's precise handwriting. As the visitors finally departed, promising to return the following day to continue their discussions, Charlotte felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. They had succeeded in their immediate goal, escaping Thornwood, bringing the ledger north, placing it in the hands of those who could use it effectively. But in doing so, they had committed themselves to a new path, one that would place them at the center of one of the most divisive issues in American society. That evening, as Charlotte, Emmeline, and Solomon sat together in the small garden behind the safe house, a rare moment of quiet in what had been a tumultuous day, Charlotte found herself contemplating the journey that had brought them to this place. "When I found the ledger," she said softly, "I was thinking only of escape, of saving ourselves from being part of Uncle's program. I never imagined we would end up here, at the heart of the abolitionist movement." "Life rarely follows the paths we imagine for it," Solomon replied, his gaze fixed on the stars appearing in the twilight sky. "When I agreed to guide you through the bayou, I thought only of helping two young women escape a fate they didn't deserve. I never expected to find my own freedom in the process." Emmeline, who had been unusually quiet since the meeting with the abolitionists, looked up from the flower she had been absently twirling between her fingers. "Do you think it will make a difference? The ledger, our testimony, will it actually change anything?" It was the question that haunted all of them, the doubt that lingered beneath their accomplishment. Would exposing Thornwood's breeding program actually help dismantle the larger system of slavery, or would it be dismissed, rationalized, forgotten by those determined to preserve the status quo? "I don't know," Charlotte admitted, "but we have to try. Having seen the truth, having held the evidence in our hands, we can't pretend ignorance anymore. We can't return to the comfortable blindness of our former lives." Solomon nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Change comes slowly, especially when it threatens established power. But it does come, eventually. Each voice raised in protest, each piece of evidence revealed, each person who chooses to stand against injustice. It all matters. It all contributes to the tide that will someday turn." These, as darkness settled fully over Philadelphia, the city that had welcomed them to freedom, Charlotte thought of Thornwood Plantation, of the lives still being shaped and constrained by the system they had escaped. The ledger, hidden beneath the floorboards upstairs, represented both a record of past atrocities and a tool for future change. It was evidence of humanity's capacity for calculated cruelty, but also in its journey from Jeremiah Thornwood's study to the hands of William Lloyd Garrison, evidence of humanity's capacity for moral awakening. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be those who would try to discredit them, to dismiss the ledger as a forgery, to paint them as traitors to their class and region. Jeremiah Thornwood's influence extended far, his connections numerous. Even here in Philadelphia, they could not consider themselves entirely safe from his reach. But they had chosen their course, committed themselves to the truth, whatever the consequences. The hidden ledger of 1839, with its cold accounting of human breeding and suffering, had been brought into the light. And in that light, perhaps, lay the seeds of justice long deferred. As stars continued to emerge in the darkening sky, Charlotte, Emmeline, and Solomon sat together in silent companionship, 3 lives forever changed by the courage to confront the truth, to reject complicity, and to believe that even the most entrenched systems of oppression could eventually be overcome by those willing to stand against them. The Lord of Louisiana's carefully hidden ledger would remain hidden no more, and in its exposure lay the promise of freedom, not just for 3 individuals who had risked everything to escape Thornwood Plantation, but potentially for countless others still waiting for the dawning of a more just world.